chapter 2. We'll start chapter 3, and maybe tomorrow we'll do chapter 4, and that would be the conclusion of the book. Of course, we can always learn it, you can always go deeper and deeper and spend more time, but I guess for round 1, this is good. Just a quick review. In short, chapter 1 describes the family of Abimelech going from Israel to Moab because of the famine. It describes how all the men die. Elimelech dies, his 2 sons die, and now you have Elimelech's wife Naomi, and two of the daughters-in-law, which are Moabite women, and they're heading back to Israel. Mother-in-law tries to encourage the daughters-in-law to go back to Moab. One, Orpah, goes back to Moab. The other, Ruth, stays with her. And chapter 1 concludes with how they get back. They come back to the fields of Beit Lechem in Judah, and everybody is surprised how this woman who went, she says, I left full. I left full. She had possessions, she had family, and now she's here. She's empty, she says. That's the word she uses. And it's sort of a very sad ending, sad turn of events. That's the end of chapter 1. Now, if you think about it, Ruth and Naomi both have 2 problems. They have a short-term problem and they have a long-term problem. And chapter 2, which we discussed, describes the short-term problem, and chapter 3 and 4 really describe the long-term problem. So the short-term problem is food, sustenance. How are they going to survive? That's a short-term problem. Excuse me, that's a short-term problem. The long-term problem is much deeper. The long-term problem is what is going to be their legacy. In other words, Naomi has no other children. 2 of her sons died. Ruth is probably she doesn't think she can marry a Jew. Most people think she can't marry a Jew, so she's in the wrong land if she's trying to find a husband. She doesn't have children, so the question now becomes, what is going to be with the lineage of this family? That's sort of a longer term problem. And like I said, chapter 2 describes the short-term solution to the short-term problem. They have food because it happens to be that they go, and Ruth goes to collect. She came in the season of the harvest, and she can collect food from the field, grain from the field, and she ends up in the field of Boaz, who's their relative. And Boaz tells her, come back every day and you'll be able to collect. And he told his people to treat her nicely, she should be able to stay at the field. And chapter 2 sort of ends where they solve the short-term problem. They have food. Now the problem becomes that it concludes really with the season. The season of the harvest is concluded. So there's no more. Sort of that scene is over because the 3 months passed, the season of the harvest is over. The last verse of chapter 2, and she stayed with Boaz's maidens to glean until the completion of the barley harvest and the wheat harvest, and she dwelt with her mother-in-law. So there's no longer a harvest. That scene is concluded. Now the question becomes, what do we do from here? So the scene opens up where chapter 3 opens up, where Naomi, the mother-in-law, says, we have to seek rest for you. We have to seek manoach, rest. Rest is, in this context, it means we have to settle you down. You have to settle down. So how are we going to settle down? So she devises the plan. What's the plan? The plan doesn't seem too modest, but the plan is she is trying to set up her daughter-in-law, Ruth, with her relative Boaz. And it can't be straightforward because they didn't have a J date. And another way to think about it is that, again, she's a Moabite woman. It's not necessarily, we're not even sure if the mother-in-law thinks she's allowed to marry. So what she does is she basically says you have to go to the field at night where Boaz would sleep, because when the season of the harvest, sort of the conclusion of the season of the harvest, when they would already be after everything was cut, they would make the piles of grain. In that season, the owner would stay there because it was just easier to camp in the field than to go back every night. And the point was that she was supposed to approach him at night and lie next to him. I'm just reading the verse. Uncover his feet. We'll discuss what that means. Lie down, and he will tell you what you shall do. And Ruth agrees. And this is the plan. Now, there's a backstory here. The backstory is, and okay, let me just give the story in short. In short, she goes there at night. He wakes up in the middle of the night and he sees a woman lying next to him. He's shocked. He's afraid. He says, "Who are you?" She says, "I'm Ruth." He says, "You are my redeemer. You're the Goel. You're the redeemer." We'll discuss what that means. He says, "Okay, wait around. I'm your redeemer, but there's another redeemer. So let's wait for the morning and see what the other redeemer will do." So in short, in the Torah, we know there's a concept called levirate marriage, yibum, which is if somebody dies without children, their brother is supposed to marry the widow. And in the ancient world, it wasn't just a brother, but it was a close family. So what's at stake here? A family member was supposed to marry the widow of somebody who dies without children. So she is coming to him and saying, "I'm Ruth, you are my Goel, you are my redeemer. You're supposed to marry me because my husband and my husband's brother all died without children." And he agrees in principle and he praises her, and we'll read those verses, very beautiful, but he's not going to do anything yet because he says there's somebody who's a closer relative. And that's where chapter 3 ends. And chapter 4 is basically the business deal. In other words, they have to go and find they find the Goel, the closer relative, and they have this whole transaction back and forth. They're talking about redeeming a field, and he's willing to redeem the field. And then the last minute, Boaz says, "Oh, if you're going to redeem the field, you also have to marry the woman." And then he says, "Oh, no, I'm not marrying the woman." And then he says he doesn't want to marry her. We'll discuss what his motives are. He doesn't want to marry her. So then Boaz says, if you don't want to marry her, so make a formal sign that you don't want to marry her. And then Boaz marries her, and they have a child, and the child becomes the ancestor of King David. That's the story. That's the backstory here. So that's really the story of, in short, of the chapter 3 and 4. So 3 is the meeting between Ruth and Boaz in the field, and then in the morning is chapter 4. The next morning is chapter 4 when Boaz has to take care of the legalities of this transaction. So this is the story in short. If anybody has any questions about the actual story, please raise your hand or share, and otherwise we'll go into some of the commentary and some of the deeper concepts here. I don't think everybody's muted. I don't know. Okay, fine. That's the story. Okay, so one way to read the story is just a simple romantic story. She seduces him. She wants to marry him because he is rich. She wants to marry him because he is rich. He wants to marry her because she is young, and it's a win-win situation. But that's not exactly the way the feeling you get from reading the verses. And it's not that the Bible is shy to talk about these concepts. It's that it seems like this is not what the Torah is saying here. And if you look at the overarching story here, what it seems is that both Ruth and Boaz are doing a kindness to each other. In other words, they're sacrificing their own well-being for the purpose of the kindness being maintaining the family of the deceased Elimelech and his 2 sons. And if you look at the verses, you will see that, for example, the Boaz tells Ruth that night, he blesses her. He says, as follows, verse 10. If you have the verse, you can look at chapter 3, verse 10. He says, So I'm just going to read, let's get some drama. Let's read verse 8, 9, 10, just for the drama here. Verse 8, and it came to pass at midnight, and the man quaked and was taken around. And behold, a woman was lying at his feet. And he said, who are you? And she said, I am Ruth, your handmaid, and you shall spread your skirt over your handmaid, for you are a near kinsman. You're my closest, you're the close relative. In the Hebrew, it's Goel, you're the redeemer. And he said, may you be blessed to the Lord, my daughter. Your latest act is of kindness is greater than the first, not to follow the young men, whether poor or rich. So he sees himself as an old man. He thinks that it's better. It would be better for Ruth to follow a young man, regardless if that young man was poor or rich. And Boaz considers the fact that she comes to him in order to sort of redeem the name of the family. In other words, that the family members should be able to keep the legacy alive. He sees that as a kindness. So that's her kindness to him. It's clear that he's doing a kindness to her because she is, like I said, a foreigner, not really accepted in the community. And the best proof is the fact that the other relative has no interest. The other relative sort of runs for the hills. He is not interested in marrying her, and therefore this is considered on both parties. This was considered a great act of kindness. And when I say kindness, I mean they're sacrificing for the purpose of the family as opposed to their own well-being. So that's one point. Now we have to see something interesting. If you want to look at the Torah, you will see that there is similar stories happen in the Torah with some of the same ingredients. And one of the ways of studying the Torah is you look where there's a similar story taking place, and then you can compare and contrast. And we alluded to this earlier, but in the beginning of the history of these people, excuse me, of the people of Ammon and Moab, it all boils down to the beginning where you had Lot. Lot is the patriarch. Lot is the nephew of Abraham. And the story is told in the Torah that after the city of Sodom is destroyed, Lot escapes the city of Sodom with two of his daughters. And they run and hide in the mountains. And in the mountains, what happens is that the daughters think that that there's no one else alive. They think everybody in the region is destroyed or everyone in the world is destroyed. So they feel that they have to have children with their father, because otherwise there'll be no seed in the world, no human continuity. So what they do is they come at night, the same plan, and it's a lot of similarities. You have two women, you have an older one telling the younger one, this is the plan, this is what we're going to do. Here the stories diverge. In the story of Lot, the Lot gets drunk, and then they come to him, and he doesn't know. He doesn't know he's drunk. He doesn't know, or he doesn't want to know. And this happens for 2 nights. The first night he lies with the oldest daughter, second night with the younger daughter. And that's where the nations of Ammon and Moab emerge. These two people who become the ancestors, one of them become the ancestors of Ruth. So you have a lot of similarities to this story. This story, again, you have the great-granddaughter, again, coming to somebody at night. Again, it's almost a similar theme, because just like the daughters of Lot, they thought that the words they use, we have to continue the lineage. Here too, what's at stake is the lineage of the family of Avimelech. But where the stories change is over here. Boaz, he wants to know what's going on. The first question is, who are you? What's your name? Who are you? What's the difference? If a beautiful woman comes to you at night, you say, let's go. What's the problem? What do you mean, who are you? And she answers him, and she answers him very interesting. We'll talk about that when we get to there. The point is, everything here is done from this point on. In contrast to Lot, here it's done with knowledge. It's not done out of when it's done with a lack of knowledge, it's not for overarching purpose. Then it's considered immoral. And that's why with the daughters of Lot, it says, Lo yada b'shechva v'kumah. He didn't know when he lied down. He didn't know when she woke up. When he woke up, the guy was totally intoxicated. Here, it's all done with knowledge, and therefore it's a plan, and therefore he doesn't follow his instincts, and therefore this marriage is sort of corrects the previous relationship that began the story of Moab. This relationship sort of heals that, and that's how she can come back into the family. So that's into the Jewish people. So that's just an interesting point. Let's look a little bit for the Kabbalah, a little legal, a little Kabbalistic. So if you read the verses, it says the plan again. The plan is she comes. Naomi tells her daughter-in-law, "You go to him. Go to the place that he will lie. You shall come and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what you shall do." So we have this concept of uncover his feet. What does that mean? It means you could say it means literally just uncover his feet, and therefore expose him. Or you could say there's also a little bit more meaning here. And we're going to give both a legal angle as well as a mystical angle. So the legal angle is that if you look at the Bible, you look at the story in Deuteronomy, there's a law called chalitza. What's chalitza? Chalitza is if the brother-in-law does not want to marry his the widowed sister-in-law, so then there's a ceremony. What's the ceremony? The ceremony is that the widow takes off his shoe. She takes off his shoe and she says, "This is the man who does not want to build his brother's home." And then she spits, and then they say that he doesn't have to marry her and she could marry somebody else. So some of the commentaries see a parallel. When she's revealing his feet, literally margalotav, to reveal his feet, the word is regel, she's alluding to the fact that you have to decide whether or not you're going to be like the person where the Torah says that if you don't want to marry the widow of your brother, then we take off your shoe and your foot is exposed. And some people say it's alluding to that ceremony. Okay, let's go a little deeper. What's the purpose of that ceremony? What does it mean to take off the shoe? Why is taking off the shoe a sign for somebody who doesn't want to build his brother's home, doesn't want to marry the widow of his brother? So there's one Kabbalistic commentary who says as follows. It's actually pretty interesting. He says, if you look at the body and the soul, so the body is like the shoe of the soul. Why do you have a shoe? Why do you wear a shoe? You wear a shoe because when you walk down the street, you don't want to get harmed. So there's sort of some separation, but it's protection for the foot, and it also sort of serves as a bridge. It allows the body to interact with the earth. So in that sense, the physical body is like a shoe for the soul. And the person who doesn't want to marry his brother's widow and then therefore allow for a child to be born, and what happens is when the child is born, the soul of the departed goes into the body of the son, right? So then the body of the child becomes like the shoe for the soul, and it sort of gives continuation for that soul. So if a person does not want to do that, what he's doing is he's literally taking off the shoe, the body, from his brother's soul. He's not allowing the body to express itself here in this world. And that's the reason that that's the symbolism of the ceremony. The symbolism of the ceremony is if you don't want to bring your brother's shoe, if you don't want to create a shoe for your brother, a shoe is a vessel through which the soul can act in this world, then sort of measure for measure, we take off your shoe to show that you don't want to be the shoe. So in that sense, it could be that is what she's alluding to. Okay, so what does she tell him? This is very interesting. What does she tell him? She says, he wakes up in the middle of the night, he says, "Who are you? Miat, who are you?" And she said, "I am Ruth, your handsmaid, and you shall spread your skirt over your handsmaid, for you are a near kinsman." So there's a few points here. First point is the word anochi. So in a few days, Friday is the holiday of the giving of the Torah. We got the 10 Commandments. The first word of the Torah, of the 10 Commandments, is Anochi. I am the Lord your God, Anochi. But Anochi is different than Ani. Ani is the more common way of saying I. Anochi is a more formal way of saying I. So what she is saying, Ruth says for the first time in the book, the first time this word is used, she says Anochi, I am. but I am sort of referring to herself in the formal sense. In other words, at this time, remember, nobody in town asks her who she is. Nobody in town treats her with dignity. The only person who has done that before was Boaz. And Boaz does the same right now at this point. At this point, he says, who are you? He doesn't just treat a woman as an object. He wants to know, who are you? What's your inner identity? And then that's why, and she responds and she says, this is who I am. Now she continues. She says, spread your, here they translate your skirt, spread your wing over your handsmaid, for you're the Goel, you're the Redeemer. Now, some people would say what she is telling him, she's actually playing on the words he told her. When they met in the field during the day, during the harvest, earlier in the season, the first time they met, he tells her, Boaz tells Ruth, he says, you're blessed to God, which you came to take shelter under the wings of God. Same words. You came to take shelter under God's wings. Now she says to him, uses the same phrase, she says, you spread your wings over me. So one way to say it is, one way to think about this is, Boaz says, you came to get shelter under God. What she is saying is that, yes, we're coming to, she is coming to take shelter under God. In other words, she's joining the Jewish people, but the responsibility, she's saying the responsibility to take care of me is not God, is you. You have to do it because you're the relative. In other words, she's shifting the responsibility from God to the person, to Boaz. She says this, so the same phrase that Boaz used, he said, oh, you came to be under the shelter of God. She says, yes, I'm here for the shelter of God, but the responsibility is yours. You should put your wing over me. She uses that same phrase probably to evoke that concept. So that's another interesting angle. Now, it's an interesting word that the Bible keeps using. It appears here for the first time, and it's going to appear many times in the end of chapter 3 and chapter 4, and that's the word goel. That's the word redeemer. And in the Bible, redeemer is a relative who acts on behalf of the deceased relative. It's used in the context of marriage. It's used in the context which we read 2 weeks ago in the Torah. It's used in the context of if somebody sells a field, the relative has the right to buy it back, so the field remains in the family. It's going to be used in that context in chapter 4 as well, but it's also in the book of Leviticus. It's also used in the negative context. If somebody gets killed, if somebody kills someone by mistake, or someone kills someone and there's no witnesses, and it was done by mistake, there's a city, the law says that there's a city of refuge, and the person who killed by mistake runs to the city of refuge to take refuge, because if he doesn't, the Goel Hadam, literally the redeemer of the blood, is able to come and kill the killer, the inadvertent killer. So the word Goel is used as a relative in the Bible. But you can also say that what's really, again, one of the purposes of this book is to figure out where the lineage, to establish the lineage of the King David, of the monarchy within Judaism. Ultimately, it's a question of where is the redemption of the people going to come from. We're living in a time, again, we're living in a time of the Judges. Time of the Judges was a very difficult time for the Jewish people. There was invasions, there was infighting, there was separation. There was not a unified people. And when she says, I want you to be my redeemer, she could be saying that literally, but it can also be a more figurative concept that when we say redeemer, we mean that this marriage is going to produce the redeemer for that era, the redeemer for the Jewish people at the time. Ultimately, also redeemer for the entire world, because the Mashiach descends from King David. So that's an interesting concept about the word redeemer that keeps appearing, that keeps appearing, and it has a literal meaning, but also it has a mystical and a spiritual meaning as well. So this is what happens. That's the story. The story is that she lies there all night. She rose before anybody could recognize them. It's too dark. And he said, I'm reading verse 15. He says, ready the shawl you are wearing and hold it. And she held it. And he measured out 6 barleys and placed them upon her. and he came to the city. She gave her some breakfast food, barley for breakfast, and they came to the city. She came to her mother-in-law, and she said, "Who are you, my daughter?" And she told her all that the man had done to her. And she said, "He gave me these 6 barleys, for he said to me, 'Do not come empty-handed to your mother-in-law.'" And she said, mother-in-law said, "Sit still, my daughter, until you know how the matter will fall, for the man will not rest until he has resolved this matter today." So these verses are very strange. There are a lot going on here. Once you start analyzing, the whole thing requires a lot of explanation. Let's start with the end. She comes in the morning. She says, "What happened?" She tells her what happened. And then she says, "He gave me these 6 pieces of barley because I don't want you to go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law." And the mother-in-law says, "Don't worry, this matter will be resolved today." How does she know it's going to be resolved today? You could be dating for 3 years before you know when the groom is going to propose. She says it's going to be resolved today. How do you know it's going to be resolved today? Where does she get that idea? That's one question. Another question is, the entire verse 17 is made up. In other words, there's no record. Ruth says, "He gave me 6 barleys, for he said to me, 'Do not come empty-handed to your mother-in-law.'" We don't know that he said that. It's possible that he said it, but it's not recorded. And it's very strange. If you look carefully, you will see that nowhere in the book does Boaz talk to Naomi. Nowhere in the book does Boaz, the wealthy relative, talk to the widow of his relative. All he's talking to is he's talking only to Ruth. The entire interaction over the last 3 months was between him and Ruth. He never said, "How's your mother-in-law doing?" Or "Can I meet her?" or "Can I help her?" Nothing. There's no discussion between Boaz and Naomi and the mother-in-law. And here we just read that he gives her. He says, "I'm giving you 6 barleys," and then he came to the city with her. And then she goes to her. It doesn't say that he told her mother that he told her, "This is for your mother-in-law." But Ruth says, "Oh, the man told me this is for you, so you don't come empty-handed for your mother-in-law." In other words, it's for your mother-in-law. So that's strange. Did that happen, or did that not happen? That's a second question. That's the second question on these 3 verses. Verse 16 is also difficult. She came to her mother-in-law and she said, "Who are you, my daughter?" So the mother-in-law doesn't know who the daughter is? Well, some people say that she came at twilight. She came at sort of as dawn is breaking. So it's still dark outside. So she knocks on the door, and Naomi says, "Who are you? Who's at the door?" But that's not the simple interpretation, because it says she came to her mother-in-law and she says, "Who are you, my daughter?" So she knows he's her daughter. So what's "who are you"? So there's a lot to discuss here. We just put out 3 questions. Let's start with the end. Let's start with "Who are you, my daughter?" The question here, the big question here is whether or not Boaz will marry his relative Ruth. Again, we keep reiterating what's at stake is she's a Gentile woman. Even if she converted, you're not allowed to marry a Moabite woman. At least that's what the people understood at the time. We'll see later that Boaz was the one who taught that no, you can't marry a Moabite man, a male convert, but you could marry a Moabite female convert. But we don't know that Naomi knows about this at all, which is also part of the reason why the plan was to go and seduce him at night instead of just sending him a formal request, because they didn't assume that Boaz is going to want to marry them. But in any case, now she comes in the morning, she sees her daughter, and she says, "Who are you, my daughter?" What does it mean, "who are you"? She's not asking, "Who are you?" as in, "What's your name?" or who are you? She's saying, "What's your status? Did he marry you? Did he not marry you? Did he accept you? Did he reject you? Did he consider you a Jewish person? Did he consider you someone who could marry into the Jewish people?" That is the question. And then she answers, she told him everything that Boaz said. And Boaz said he has no objection to marrying her, and he will do so if the other person doesn't want to marry her because he's a closer relative. So that's the answer to the question of he actually promises her that he's going to marry her if the other relative doesn't want to do so. So that's the answer to the question, who are you? When she says, who are you? She means, what's your status? Are you allowed to join the Jewish people? Okay. Now, 17 is tricky. 17, he gave me these 6 barleys and he said to me, do not come empty-handed to your mother-in-law. That leads to Naomi saying, she just had this information, and Naomi says, oh, he gave you 6 barleys? That means by today, he's solving this problem. By today, he's going to propose marriage. By today, he's going to marry you. How do you get that? So one interpretation I read, which is interesting, is he only gave her food for breakfast. If he only gave her food for breakfast, what about supper? What about lunch? Right? Oh, by then, this problem will be solved. So some people say that because he only gave her 6 pieces of barley, that's a way of saying that he's going to take care of this immediately. Because she said that he gave a promise that he's going to marry her. But who knows, till you promise, the guy says he wants to marry you, till he marries you, who knows how long that could take, right? It could take months or years. But this guy only bought her lunch. He didn't give her a diamond ring. Instead, he just gave her 6 pieces of barley. He gave her food for breakfast. Okay, so they figured that would be that's the indication that he's going to take care of business today. And that's in fact what happened. Okay, next question. Question is, what's the deal with verse 17? She said, he gave me these 6 barleys, and he said to me, do not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. Ruth is portraying this as if Boaz is concerned for the mother-in-law. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. He doesn't say that. What's the meaning of this exchange? Did Boaz indeed say these words? Did Ruth make it up? This is an issue. This is an interesting discussion.
Rabbi?
Yes.
One quick question. Isn't the technicality of them having had relations, wasn't that marriage then?
Well, I don't know what you read the story, you don't see that.
That we don't know if they did or didn't?
You don't see if they had relations. She says, you read the verses.
It says,
I don't know.
Shachav or something.
I don't know that she had relations. If she had relations, the traditional way of reading it, if she had relations, then that would itself sort of mean that he wants to marry her. And that would be the yibum. The act of yibum is very interesting. If there's a levirate connection, again, this wasn't really a levirate connection because it wasn't a brother-in-law. But if you look at the model of the levirate connection, the model of the levirate marriage, the brother does not have to betroth the woman. He doesn't have to give her a ring. He doesn't have to do anything. Just the act of intimacy is itself the marriage, because sort of they're already connected because of that that bond that he has the legal responsibility to marry her. So if you read it, it just says that they lied there. It doesn't give any indication that there was any intimacy. And it's not that the Bible is afraid to say it when there is. When the Bible is interested in talking about intimate relations, the Bible is not shy. And here there is really no indication. I mean, he says lie till the morning. He doesn't say lie with me. Doesn't say any of those terms that would typically mean intimacy in the Bible. So the understanding is he does not. I mean, I guess the traditional understanding. I'm sure other people disagree, but that's the traditional understanding.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, Rabbi, I'm sorry,
Yes.
Rabbi. No, I actually had the same thought as Amy, the implication, lift up your skirt and lie with me.
Well, lift up the skirt. Yeah, I agree. Lift up the skirt is she wants to seduce him, absolutely. But there's no indication that he goes along with it.
And is there any indication? It seems like her mother-in-law, there's a sort of angry tone, like the way somebody would say, but I don't know if tone can be inferred, that sort of like, we'll see about that kind of tone.
You mean at the end, until now, no matter what?
When she says, well, this will be taken care of. It's sort of like, sit my daughter until you sit still. I don't like the word still. I don't know where they got that. Yeah, I could see the English, sit still, my daughter. She doesn't say sit still. She says shavi, sit, but sit means be comfortable until you will know how the matter will be resolved. But then she says, the man will not rest until he has resolved this matter today. So she keeps referring to her as my daughter. That is a sense of connection, of closeness, of intimacy. So I don't know that she's being abrupt with her. The only
No,
question,
I don't mean abrupt with her. I mean abrupt, like the way you would say to a child, you sit still, I'm going to go take care of this for you. Like you.
No. So she's not saying sit still. We already decided still it has to go.
Okay.
Shavi is to sit, and it's the man will take care of it. She's not saying I will, but Boaz. Boaz will do what he needs to do to live up to his responsibility.
Okay.
Okay, so what happens in 17? In 17, we have a problem. Verse 17 says, she says that Boaz gave me 6 pieces of barley because he doesn't want me to return to my mother-in-law empty-handed. Did he say it or did he not say it? If you want to say that he said it, you can argue that the Bible doesn't always explain the first conversation. Sometimes it just repeats the conversation and you infer that it was said earlier. But in this case, it's difficult to say that because literally the story happens, what is it? How many verses before? 2 verses earlier, it says the actual story. And the actual story is he just gives her the barley. And she says that he gave me the 6 barleys so I should not come empty-handed to my mother-in-law. In other words, bringing in the mother-in-law. So one way to read this is that indeed there's some tension and friction between Naomi and Boaz. And there's some resentment. What's the resentment? Again, the resentment is all based on the history of this family, that Naomi and her husband leave the Israel when there's a famine. So therefore, people resent Naomi more than they resent Ruth. Ruth didn't do anything wrong. So then when they come back, Naomi, even though Boaz is doing kindness to Naomi because they're doing kindness to Ruth because she's Naomi's daughter-in-law, but she still does not reach out to Naomi directly ever in the story. What is Ruth trying to do? Ruth is trying to connect, sort of heal the rift between Boaz and Naomi. So she is saying things that may have not happened. We know that the Talmud says that Aaron would do this. Aaron, Moshe's brother, would pursue peace. So the Medrash says that how would he pursue peace? So if there's 2 people that would not get along, he would go to one of them and say, you know, your friend told me, the other person told me that he really wants to make peace with you. And then he would go to the other one and he would say, the other person said he really wants to make peace. And that would remove the sort of the defensiveness and the hostility between the 2. And the next time the 2 ran into each other in the market, they were happy to reconcile. So the Talmud says you're allowed to change some of the truth for the sake of peace. So it's possible that what Ruth is doing here is she's actually changing from what actually happened in reality in order to be able to heal the rift between the 2 family members of Naomi, her mother-in-law, and Boaz, the relative, and Ruth, the outsider, creates the bridge, or is seeking to create the bridge. And that's true in this story, but it's also true if you want to look at the broader picture, because we always look at the story as a specific story, but also as a symbol for what was taking place at the era. What is taking place at the era? At the era of the judges, there is great division between the various tribes. And there was almost a civil war. The previous story in the last story in the book of Judges is a civil war between the tribes and Benjamin. So what's happening here is we need somebody to heal the Jewish people and make it one cohesive kingdom. And who's the one to do it? Ultimately, it's Ruth's descendants. So ultimately, the outsider is the one who is able to heal the rift between the various tribes of Israel. Just like in this story, quite literally, Ruth is seeking to heal the rift between Boaz and Naomi. So what Ruth does for the family, ultimately Ruth does for the Jewish people as a whole. So that's a beautiful concept, that the concept of David is really, King David, the kingdom, the monarchy, is to heal the rift between the various tribes. It's a fascinating,
it just seems to me that didn't Naomi instruct Ruth on what to do? In other words, to present the claim, because Ruth wouldn't have known anything about a Levirate marriage. So it's Naomi who tells
it's possible
Ruth,
that that's the case.
And then on the other hand, and in order to send back the message to Naomi. Don't go back empty-handed to Naomi. I have answered her question. I will accept the challenge. So it seems
That's
that those two are connected.
That's a very good, that's a fine reading. But if you actually read the verses, it does not. If you read the verses, you see that Naomi gives Ruth very detailed instructions. I didn't read it inside, but I'll read it now. She gives her very detailed instructions. She tells her what to wear, how to groom herself, how to beautify herself. She gives her very detailed instructions. But the Torah specifically does not say the word that Naomi said, that tell him that he is our Redeemer. Naomi does not say those words.
No, she doesn't know those words, but he understands the meaning of the actions.
Correct. But one way to say it is that Naomi wants him to understand it on his own, but Ruth is the one who articulates it in a way that Naomi cannot. And I'll tell you something else. The word Goel, the word Redeemer, Naomi does not use in chapter 3. She uses it in chapter 2. In chapter 2, she says, when Ruth comes back from the field and she's successful, she has a lot of grain. So Naomi asked Ruth, where did you go? How did you get all this grain? And she says, oh, there was a man, Boaz. So Ruth says, Ruth says that it was Boaz. So Naomi says, oh, wonderful. That man is mi go'aleinu. He's from our redeemers. She doesn't say he is the redeemer, which means he's the closest. She says he's from our redeemers. This time, in this chapter, she doesn't say anything. She just says he's our relative. Hello, Boaz moda'atenu. Now, and now is not Boaz our kinsman in verse 2. She doesn't say the word Goel. Now, when Ruth speaks to Boaz, she says, Ki Goel ata, you are the redeemer. You are redeemer. She doesn't say the, but she doesn't say you're from the redeemers. In other words, I don't know. The short answer is I don't know exactly what Naomi said, but it seems like Ruth certainly crystallizes the conversation. One way to think about it is they didn't assume they're going to have to talk. They assumed that when he wakes up and sees the young girl lying at his feet, then he's just going to have relations with her and the problem is solved. And the conversation we'll have in the morning. That's what they assumed. I mean, that's the feeling you get, because she basically says, go lie down with him. And then she says, and then he'll tell you, she says in verse 4, come and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what you shall do. So she doesn't say, other than the only thing she tells Ruth to do is to lie there, uncover his feet and lie there. And then Boaz is supposed to take the next action. But instead, Boaz doesn't take the action. Instead, Boaz starts having a conversation. At midnight, he starts having a philosophical conversation. Who are you? And we say, it's not just who are you? Yeah, who are you? And she says, I'm Ruth. And they say, okay, well, there's another relative. They go into this whole discussion. I'm not sure this discussion was planned. It's much more logical to think that they thought that he's just going to do the act, and then in the morning they'll figure out, was this a one time? Maybe he'll continue to marry her. We're not sure, but it seems like. So I don't know the answer, Jill. I don't know exactly what Naomi said, but it seems like certainly Ruth crystallizes this request at the moment of truth.
And also the other point, Rabbi, to answer that question is that at the very beginning, Naomi didn't know that it is a possibility, because she clearly said, I have no children, so you girls stay there.
So
You
she's
don't
not
go
sure
with
that
me.
he's gonna.
She wasn't sure at the beginning. She kind of left the decision up to him.
Agreed. Excellent point. Part of the problem is that even if there is a responsibility to redeem your sister, redeem marry the widow of your relative, but we're not sure that applies to a Moabite woman, because again, they're still working under the assumption that a Moabite woman cannot join the Jewish people. So therefore, Naomi and Ruth are coming up with a plan that is sort of unconventional. This is not the conventional way to ask someone to marry you. So they're taking the unconventional route. The reason why they're taking the unconventional route is because they don't think that he's going to live up to the obligation of being a redeemer because of the circumstances, because of the legal issues with her being a Moabite woman. And Boaz says, no, I'm happy to do it, but we have to first find the closer relative. And Boaz is the one who introduces the concept of you could marry a Moabite woman, and we will discuss that in chapter 4. But going back to the story here about Ruth, the broader story of what's happening. So if you follow if you follow the story of David, of the kingdom of David, which is really the outgrowth of the story of Ruth. So David, in the beginning, when he becomes a king, he first has his kingdom in Hebron. That's where his capital city is. And after 7 years, he moves from Hebron to Jerusalem. Now, it's not why did he move from Hebron to Jerusalem? Why do you mean? Jerusalem has the best hotels. No, Jerusalem at the time was just a little hill. It wasn't a big city. It wasn't an established city. It wasn't a politically smart move to do. Why? Because Hebron is in the heart of the land of Judah. And David is from the tribe of Judah. So if you want to have a safe kingdom, if you don't want to be exposed to attack, you make your capital city in a territory that's very loyal to you. Now, what is Jerusalem? Jerusalem is literally at the border of Judah and Benjamin. Now, who's Benjamin? Benjamin is the tribe from which David took the kingdom away from Saul, and Saul is from Benjamin. And in general, Benjamin were not too happy with the tribe of Judah for other reasons as well. So, but David specifically doesn't want to be deep within his own tribe's territory. He puts himself at the border of his tribe and Benjamin's tribe to represent the unity, to represent that he's not trying to surround himself by his own tribe to protect him. To the contrary, he's trying to bring a kingdom that's going to heal the various segments, the various tribes of the Jewish people and make them into one cohesive people. So David moving and becoming sort of the bridge between the various tribes of Israel is sort of an outgrowth of what Ruth does. And Ruth sees herself as the outsider whose job it is to create the healing between David and between Boaz and Naomi. So unfortunately, we're running against the clock. I think it's 10:50. We're going overtime. So